Okay, I'd like to welcome each of you to this retreat. Retreats are special gifts. Not everyone gets to make one. They've been around a long time. They seem to be reinvented any time a group gets interested in spirituality. They have different names, different flavors, different agendas. But the main thrust of a retreat is to get closer to God, to get closer to yourself, and to be able to have the ability to get closer to other people in meaningful ways. So it's some time out. It's rest and relaxation. Some of you have worked hard this week. I hope you get the rest in that you need. I do need to point out at the beginning that a number of the people here making the retreat are members of Alcoholics Anonymous and Al-Anon, but this is not an AA or Al-Anon retreat because that would be a violation of principles of those programs. So for those of you who aren't physically present here tonight and are just listening to this, I'd like to welcome you too and ask you to pray along with the rest of us as we begin this retreat. So let's just silently, consciously put ourselves in the presence of God as we understand Him for a few moments. Father, we ask you to be with us during this retreat. Give us the open-mindedness and the willingness that is necessary to allow you to have your way with us this weekend. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. There's another meaning of the word retreat, not just retreating from our regular routine, taking some time and space away from our regular time and space so that we can get closer to God and what it is that we care the most about. But there's a beautiful meaning for those of us involved in recovery with the word retreat, because it means to turn around and go the other way. And that's what a lot of us have to do to get well. Most of the people listening to this tape are members of different recovery programs relative to chemical dependency and living in the families of people who have those particular kinds of problems. Realizing that, at the beginning of the evening, I'd like to make a special award. And I'm sure you'll understand the spirit that this is done in. Alcoholics Anonymous and Al-Anon are not known for its member recognition or for passing out awards. This year at this retreat, that will be changed because we've decided to do something different. Every community, even most groups, have that one member who with 10 years or more of continued program serves as the resident know-it-all. Distributor of inside information. Interpreter of the big book, the 12 and 12. And they can tell instantly whether a newcomer is going to stay sober. They also give the unfortunate slipper the "I told you so," talks longer at meetings, expects to chair often, is upset if not called on, says we're not hard enough on the newcomers, objects to talking about money, opposes changes in most new groups, thinks the 12-step calls should be handled by others, has less patience each year, is no longer tolerant, has forgotten his last drunk, but is nevertheless the Gibraltar of his community. Tonight we have a special award for one of those individuals. And at this time I'd like to call Bill N. forward to receive the first Bleeding Deacon Award. if this is just the beginning of a long tradition, but we started with a real bleeding deacon, and we all made it. You know, sobriety, recovery can be fun, and it's a wonderful thing that's happened in our age. When I first started, even though I'm a recovering alcoholic myself, when I first started working in the field of alcoholism, I couldn't wait for newcomers to get to that point, which they all do, and we all do, where they say, "Why me?" And with all my new knowledge, I was dangerous. You know, they were playing right into my hands. If there were a blackboard around, they were in a lot of trouble. Because I would explain things at great length. Someone pointed out to me a couple of years later that at that point, when people ask, "Why me?" all those explanations that I went into really didn't help them. And I had to admit that that's true. So I had to keep quiet for a little while. But then something changed, and what changed was this. I discovered that I looked forward with as much eagerness as I had before for the newcomer to say, "Why me?" Because I had a different answer this time. And every time they said, "Why me?" I said, "Why not?" We got a lot of people with a lot of problems. Of all the really difficult problems in life, yours is the one that responds easiest to treatment or to recovery if you want to get involved in that. So now you know you got a problem. You want to do anything about it? Boy, that cut the lecture short a lot. Why not? Because people have been dying terrible alcoholic deaths for centuries. And you and I are alive at a time when there's an answer, when large numbers of people are staying sober comfortably. And, you know, if you live in our part of the country today and you can't find an AA meeting or an Al-Anon meeting, you're not looking. I mean, they're everywhere. They're every time of day. I stumbled onto a regular 2:30 in the afternoon meeting the other day. I couldn't believe it. And that's wonderful to have access to that kind of understanding and wisdom and program. Alcoholics and families of alcoholics can recover. The beauty of that is that we never really recover alone. And some of you have heard me say this before, but I was so impressed with the First World Conference of Narcotics Anonymous. Not that I qualify for that program, because I don't. That was La Mirada, California, a dozen or more years ago. And the reason I got to go is because it was their first world conference, and they panicked about a month ahead of time, thinking that not enough people would show up and they couldn't pay for the hotel. So they invited a lot of us who were friends of recovering addicts who would be interested enough to attend that convention. And it was an incredible experience because the whole weekend just built and built and built. And I don't know if you've ever been part of something like that, but by Sunday afternoon, everybody was crazy. It was so good, you didn't want it to get any better because you thought something was going to short circuit pretty quick. And you couldn't take any more, and nobody wanted to leave. It was a real awkward moment. And we all knew that we were making history because it was the first World Convention. You know, they weren't going to do the first World Convention again next year. That was going to be the second one. And 4 or 5 speakers on Sunday afternoon, one after the other, got up to try to put some closure on that First World Conference of Narcotics Anonymous, and they all blew it. You know, they just got up in front of everybody and went, you know, we all knew somebody else had to try after that, and they did. And it just kind of went downhill. And finally, the chairperson called on a young girl who was, I think, 19 at that time, interestingly enough, from Phoenix, and I had known her before. Her name was Susie. A couple of you here tonight, I know her. And he said, "We can't stay here forever. Susie, get up here and end this thing." Well, Susie was one of the youngest people at that convention and probably thought herself the most unlikely to be called on. She got up to the microphone and cried. And she says, "I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say." And then she said, "I do too know what to say." And here's what Susie said at the end of that conference. She said, "You can't do it for me, but I can't do it by myself." And Susie sat down and no one moved. It was one of those incredible touching moments. There wasn't anything left to say. You can't do it for me, but I can't do it by myself. We sat there for 5 minutes. Finally, somebody stood up and stretched out their hands, and we said the Lord's Prayer, and we left. And I remember the 4 people that I was with, as we walked out to the parking lot to get in our car, didn't say anything, and as we drove away, we didn't say anything. Because Susie summed it up. Or someone summed it up through Susie. You know, you can't do it for me, but I can't do it by myself. So you and I are alive at a time when large numbers of people are staying clean and sober. In families who were so sick, up until just a few years ago, they didn't know they were sick. You know, they just thought they were right and righteous and holy, and if you were picked on that much, you'd be resentful and angry and vindictive and jealous too. And they're starting to learn that they have problems and they're getting well. So it's a great time to be alive. Why me? That's a mystery. Why should I be lucky enough to be alive at a time when Alcoholics Anonymous and Al-Anon are so popular and growing, and now we have other programs that are spinning off using the same principles? I went into shock last year in Montreal. AA had its 50th birthday. And I was sitting there. In a couple of weeks, September 3rd, if God so chooses, I'll have 18 years of continuous sobriety. So I'm sitting up there in Montreal last year with 17 years, and it suddenly struck me, I've been around a third of the time this thing's been happening. And that made me feel very, very small and humble and blessed just to be part of something like that. And to watch at least a third of the years that have gone on in terms of changes. And there's so much change that goes on in recovery. You know, the book tells us that. It says we only know a little, and we're learning more every day. Funny thing is, we don't seem to learn it as individuals. It's like Susie said, we learn it as a group. You know, we have to share it, and we have to check it out with each other before we know if it's the truth or just another one of our bright ideas. I used to have a lot of bright ideas before I sobered up. In fact, the last year of my life I spent designing recovery programs for me, winding up drunk trying to figure out why it happened, you know, because they all made sense. Like pop psychology books, they all make sense. I'm addicted to those even today. And I think others are too. They put them by the cash register in the bookstores. What do you call it? Impulse buying? Yeah, I think they know us. Anyway, one of the great gifts to me when I got to the program was something I'd never, ever heard about before, and that was this gift that you and I have of living in the present. I'd never thought of that. And I stumbled across the phrase a few years ago that I love to share because it has so much meaning for so many people. And it's simply this: wherever you are, be there. Wherever you are, be there. It's not a bad way to live your life, because you find out what's going on when it's going on. Up until that time, I had spent most of my life, and I still do today, I slip back into it very easily, pouting about the past and daydreaming about the future and just stumbling through today. And yet the present moment, the now, the here and the now, wherever we are right now, is the only place where change takes place, because back here, that's history. If it happened yesterday, it's not right or wrong, it's history. And you can't relive it, you can't change it, you can learn from it. And if it is here in the future, it's not real yet because it hasn't happened. But the past and the future have great power over many of us. Regrets about the past, remorse, enormous fear of the future. And yet, in recovery, the people that have been involved in that say, why don't you put the emphasis on the present? Why don't you make your mistakes now? And why don't you do your growing now rather than write a diary about it or narrate it or... I was amazed how, when I first became aware of it, particularly with, you can try it with newcomers, I hate to pick on them, but anyway, ask a newcomer how they feel. They never give you a direct answer. And that's because they don't know. Yeah. How do you feel? Huh? Yeah. That's how I live my life. And if they really said what they were thinking, they'd say, well, let me figure it out. If you got to figure out how you feel, you don't know how you feel. That's one thing you're doing all the time is feeling. There's another beautiful thing about recovery, and that is that it's not me and God, or it's not me alone, it's all of us together. Because God is doing for us what we can't do for ourselves, and He seems to do that through others. We have our private moments, we have our own spiritual experiences, we have those very special times when perspective comes into our life and things all make sense that really aren't shared with anyone else. But most of what happens as a result of being willing and having the courage to share our experience, strength, and hope with each other. It's not all that bad to be a newcomer, and particularly those of you who've not made a retreat before. Let me give you a few hints on how to make a good retreat. Even if you're just listening to my voice, you can make a retreat with us. You don't need a special place. Although it's a good idea to make a retreat at some place away from where you spend your regular time, because you're surrounded by familiarity and routine or busyness or business. So if you can get a special place away, it helps. And those of us on this retreat happen to be at a very special place at the Franciscan Renewal Center in Scottsdale, Arizona. So wherever you are, be there. If you're at the Franciscan Renewal Center, or if you are somewhere else, be present to wherever that is and whoever it is that you are today, whether you understand that very well or not. And if you do that, then you have a chance of making a good retreat. One of the biggest enemies of a good retreat is definite, specific expectations ahead of time. I'm going to make that retreat because this needs to happen. You know, I'll somehow get her there and she'll hear something and change. Or whatever it happens to be. Or I'll hear something and I'll change. See, I'll find out the magic. I'll find out what all those other people know that I don't seem to have caught on to yet. Or I'll have this problem that will be solved by the end of the retreat. If you come to a retreat to solve a problem, it probably won't work that way at all. I don't know what happens on retreats ahead of time. I always know afterwards, maybe not right away. It's a slow, gradual process. But my experience with retreats, and I'm speaking as someone who used to badmouth them, because I thought it was kind of a phony elitist group who went away to get spiritual and get ahead of the rest of the folks. And I didn't think you could accelerate spiritual growth, but I was wrong. I know that that's not true because I've experienced it myself, but more often I've seen it in other people. I have the privilege of coming back to places year after year where people make retreats. So a good way to make a retreat is to not look at it as a problem-solving thing, unless you're willing to surrender the problems and let God pick which one He wants to solve for you during the weekend. Some advice I give people is to mentally throw all their problems in a big trash bag and to kind of toss it out in the back alley or out in the front. And when you leave Sunday afternoon, if you want to pick it up, I mean, if you're that sick, you can do that. Some of you will go absolutely stark raving nuts if you don't have a problem, so pick one to play with for the weekend and dedicate yourself to fussing with it. But you don't have to bother the rest of us. You know, don't tell us about it. I'll be doing a lot of different things in between times during this retreat and be somewhat cheated, as some of you may feel that way too, not being able to spend the kind of time on a one-to-one thing that I would like to with you. But we have a friend in the back of the room, Tony, who will understand this really well, because he lived with a priest that I lived with here for a number of years, Alexander Manville. And I want to tell you something about Alex. Alex is one of those really bright, talented guys. He's kind of omnicompetent, you know. He can do anything he wants to do. And you can live with him for a long time and finally find out he knows something about this whole area that you didn't even know he was interested in. The kind of guy that could make you real jealous, because he succeeds at whatever he wants to do, and whatever he wants to do, he does with excellence and style. And when Alex was here, I found his Achilles heel, or I thought I did. And it was simply this. Not only are some people gifted that way, but particularly with the job description of a priest in the minds of some people, you're expected to be able to do all kinds of things. And that's crazy, particularly when you start believing it. But there's one thing that Alex isn't very good at. And he knows I talk about him this way, because somebody sent him a tape once. The thing that Alex could not stand was counseling. Now, as a priest, he's a great administrator, he's a marvelous teacher, he's a great liturgist. He could put events together and have them happen. He was a wonderful leader, could get all kinds of people enthusiastic about things they'd never heard of before. But he hated to counsel people. And you just see the blood drain out of his face when someone said, I got a problem, could I see you for a little while? Alex would panic. But he did some counseling, and I'll give you the whole Alexander Manville School of Counseling. All of Alex's counseling sessions lasted 5 minutes. And during those 5 minutes, he did one of two things. The first thing he would do is let the person talk for 2 or 3 minutes and look them right in the eye and say, wait a minute, I don't need to hear anymore. I know what you need to do. And he had this deep voice that was commanding, and people would be dumbfounded. He'd look them right in the eye and say, shape up. Now what happened at that point was about half the people couldn't wait to get out of there. And the other half went home and shaped up. It's amazing. He's got a better average than the rest of the counselors. The other thing he did, and this is unbelievable, but he got away with it, particularly if it was a relationship problem or if there was a couple there, he let them talk to us. He'd do the same thing. Wait a minute, I see what's wrong here. I know what your problem is. You are just so dull and boring that I can see why no one wants to relate to you. Now get out of here and do something about not being so dull and boring. Half the people fled the scene, the other half went home and got a little excitement into there. Alex is probably the best counselor I've ever known. He didn't know that till I told him. Alcohol is addictive. So are problems. There's research done today, and usually I don't talk about research a lot at retreats, but there's a lot of research done today that tells us that addicts, let's talk about alcoholics to just kind of limit it for a while. An alcoholic is an addict. Alcoholics are alcohol addicts. That's what they are. That's what we are. The research says that not only are addicted people addicted to their drug of choice that they ingest chemically or physically into their body, but they're also addicted to some internal chemistry within their body that is released or manufactured in the presence of the addictive chemical agent that is taken from the outside. Now, a lot of old-time AA people have talked about that for years, and they talk about it in ways like this. Alcoholics are addicted to their own juices. That's the folksy way of talking about it. But the beautiful thing, and it's particularly true in heroin addicts, where they find that the heroin addict gets high not just because of the heroin, but because of what the heroin releases in their brain that's already there. And incidentally, in case you're wondering, a lot of you have heard and believe, not just because people have said it, but because a lot of us have seen the tragedy of it, that alcoholism is progressive. And what that means is it gets worse as you drink. But what it means is that the potential for getting worse continues while you don't drink. So that suppose you have an alcoholic who terminates the use of alcohol and stays sober for 10 years and then starts drinking again. What you see in about 2 or 3 months after that is a person fall apart right in front of you. It's as if they had drank for the 10 years. It hits them that hard, and that's what's really meant by the progressive part of alcoholism. And if you don't believe it, don't feel bad. I didn't believe it either. But when you see it, when you watch someone physically, emotionally, spiritually fall apart right in front of you, and Bill's nodding his head there, he's a good example of it. He fell apart good. Then you come to believe in that. And what that is during the drinking years, one of these chemicals that we're addicted to gets stored in your brain, and it continues to be manufactured even when you're not drinking. But when you start drinking again, that's released, and then all heck breaks loose in your head, and that's part of the explanation of how alcoholism is progressive. But we have also found out that today there are a lot of ways, without taking a chemical agent into your body externally, that you can get that high, release those chemicals, or manufacture them within your system. And guess what those ways are? There are certain attitudes. Chronic anger, chronic fear, chronic upsetness. Now just stop right there. Look at the wisdom of the people who put that book, Alcoholics Anonymous, together. I'm talking a lot about Alcoholics Anonymous. I want you to know I can't speak for them, and I'm no authority on that any more than anyone else, but I have a great deal of reverence for and interest in that subject. So whatever I say is my opinion. Please regard it as that. You know, those old-timers said, if you want to stay sober comfortably, why don't you inventory resentments? That's chronic anger. Why don't you inventory fear? Why don't you inventory sex? Our relationships with other people. That's the chronic upsetness. The kinds of mistakes that we make in dealing with other people. So you can believe, I suppose, that that kind of literature is inspired. I believe that most of the time. I mean, when you talk to people that knew the guys that wrote that stuff and realize the wisdom that they came up with, it's amazing. You know, there had to be more to it than just some people wanting to get sober and to pass that message along on their own wisdom. We get addicted to problems. We get addicted to worry. We get addicted to fussing. I have a lot of character defects relative to anger. And I became painfully aware that sometimes when I'm angry, it's simply because I haven't been angry for a while and it's time. And I need my fix. And you don't need a reason. But it's customary to have a reason, so you make one up. And you blame somebody else or some other thing for something that doesn't relate to the anger at all. And you get out of touch with reality real quick when you start doing that kind of stuff. So, you can intuitively know that this is a problem and make the decision, I will never be angry again. And you can hear the anger involved in that decision, but you know, there's usually so much self-deception going on at that time that you're unaware of that. And that's what we're dealing with in recovery, is self-deception. It's not so much chemistry, it's self-deception. It's, I'll go into this tomorrow, but I'll just whet your appetite right now. I have a terrible time when people ask me, because I know something about this, and the general public asks it this way sometimes. They say, aren't all alcoholics liars? Gee, what do you say? If you say yes or no, you're wrong. I'll tell you that right now. Usually when we think of somebody lying, we think of them consciously willing to deceive, and that's usually not what's going on. It's about as subtle and as sneaky as needing to be angry and then manufacturing a reason for it. So the way I like to describe it, I don't know if it makes sense to non-alcoholics or not, but it makes sense, at least it's acceptable to alcoholics. I say, alcoholics don't lie any more than anybody else, but they're highly adept at subtly adjusting the truth. Oh, okay, that's all right. Because we adjust the truth a little bit here, a little bit here, a little bit here. By the time we get down here, what's going on has nothing to do with anything that was going on back here. So we're not only not playing with a full deck, the cards don't even match. You know, some of them have numbers on it, some of them are ABC, some of them have pictures. Because we have a lot of realities going. And that's why alcoholics don't play games with each other, because nobody else can understand the rules. And it's not the alcoholic that's changing the rules, it's the alcoholism that changes the rules as it goes along. And you can see that in the spouse. You can really see it in the spouse. They get into that people-pleasing stage. They quit complaining. They say, well, I'll just surrender. I'll do whatever he wants or whatever she wants. And maybe someday the husband will say he's the alcoholic, just offhandedly says, what I wish you would really do is have some fun with me. So let's play some sports. That would be a nice thing for couples to do. Why don't we play tennis? So she goes out and buys this nice little tennis outfit and gets it all color coordinated and dusts off her racket and gets some balls, and she shows up at 7 in the morning just like she said she would to play tennis, and there he is wearing a helmet and cleats, and she's going to get creamed just because the rules got changed overnight, But you never catch up with that stuff. You never catch up with it. The spouse never does. Neither does the alcoholic, because he's out of control too. The rule changing is instantaneous, and it's quicker than thought. Thought's pretty slow sometimes. We're really the victims of all kinds of things that we don't know are even going on, but we think we understand what's happening, and we don't have a chance. There's an enormous amount of self-pity, and if you want to get back in touch with it, just listen to a good country western station for a while. And I go through that phase once or twice a month. It lasts a day or two, and then it's out of my system. But when I'm there, I love it. I just need to dig into that every now and then. And I'm going to get this right sometime, but somebody wrote the perfect country and western song. It goes something like, oh, it rained the day my mom got out of prison. And then it goes on that he went to pick her up in a pickup truck and it got hit by a train, and somebody ran over his dog and raped his horse. And, no matter what can happen, it just goes downhill. But there's a real reason for that. There's a basis for it, because what's going on in your life is really so sad that we need to express that sometimes. And that may not be as unhealthy as we think it is. Of course, if you live in self-pity all the time. I kind of got burned out as a counselor a couple of times in my life. One time I saw the writing on the wall when a woman was semi-suicidal, and she says, and I was fed up listening to her stories, and she finally said, but you don't understand. I said, lady, I don't care. I don't want. Anyway, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. Are addicts and alcoholics grandiose? We're so humble and unassuming and average. That's probably the worst thing you can call an alcoholic. God, you're normal. I've always wanted to meet a normal person. That's the reason for the next drunk right there. Everything is in extremes. And there's a wonderful story in the back of the book Alcoholics Anonymous that says something to the effect that a person before they discovered program was either on top of the heap or under it, and now they have this joy of just being part of something, and it's so wonderful and so new. And boy, that takes a lot of stress out of your life, just to be part of something. That's not bad at all. I ran across something not long ago that I didn't even know I still had that kind of gets me back in touch with some of that. So since we're beginning our retreat tonight, it might not be a bad way to get in touch with step 1, which talks about being powerless over alcohol and having an unmanageable life. This happened. I used to live in downtown Phoenix, and I lived about 2 blocks from where the old Greyhound bus station used to be. And I was supposed to go over there at 12:30 in the morning one night to meet a friend who was coming in town. And I did, and the bus was an hour late, so now it's like 1:30, and the bus came, and he wasn't on the bus. And I was upset. So I sat there on that old hard wooden bench, just in terminal remorse, over fate, and it was in the summer. It was hot, and one of those great big bugs, one of those Mexican water beetles, came along. Now it's 2:30 in the morning. I've been drinking, and I got up early to show this guy how much I cared about him, and he didn't even have the courtesy of being there. So the bug and I had this talk, and it got pretty profound after a while. Anyway, there's a bug on the walk, and it creeps and crawls and falls and stalls. Poor little bug. You poor dumb bug. Dear little bug, I love you. But you don't even know what that means. How could a dumb bug know what it is to be loved? God, I'm glad I'm not a bug. Maybe the bug doesn't hurt or ache as much as I do, but I wish he could. Because if he could, maybe, then just maybe, he could love. If he could, it would be worth it. Pain, yes. Suffering, yes. But then what are bugs for anyway but to be crushed, swept aside, sickened at, and forgotten? But little bug, I'm more than you will ever be. I'm alive, like you, but I know it. And I know that I'm loved. And because of this, I don't mind being squashed or feared or sickened at. Poor bug. You cause many people discomfort, just as I do. But you don't even know it. Ah, dumb little bug, how I feel for you. I wish you could share my pain, for I hurt too. But I know this, and that is the difference. I am a super bug. I'm super hurt. But if God had a reason for creating bugs, squishy, squashy, creepy, crawly, then he had a super reason for me, the super bug. Maybe I, as super bug, have a super stench, a super stink, a super kind of obnoxiousness. But whatever I am, I know even if I'm the stinkiest, even super smelly, that I'm yours, Lord. And that even if I'm the smelliest, stinkiest, most obnoxious of all, that I must be loved by the most lovable. Thank you for being the most. For if the most can love the least, then I'm proud to be a bug. Thank you, Lord, for making bugs. That's a good summary of my theology at that time. And it's full of all kinds of self-pity and grandiosity and love and faith and all the things we'd like to have and all the things we'd like not to have. And that's what alcoholism's like. That's where I came from. I used to talk to bugs. I used to listen to them. And I think you did too. Otherwise you wouldn't be here. Otherwise you wouldn't understand. So we've come a long ways from that kind of confusion, and yet right in the middle of all of that there's a hunger and a thirst that some people would claim parallels a thirst for spirituality and for meaning beyond what it is that we can touch and feel and make sense out of logically. I'd like to end tonight by sharing a story I always begin retreats with. And I don't think I've given a retreat that I haven't started with this story. It takes about 10 minutes, and some of the people in this room tonight are part of it. And that's a thrill. I guess I'd been sober about a year when I was totally fouled up. And I called my sponsor at that time, whose name was Les. And that was a man who I had enormous faith in and trust. And he really knew more about me than I knew about me. And I had a great deal of faith in him. And I said, I was in a phone booth. I was hysterical. And I called him. I remember that part because he said, Gavin, where are you? When he finally figured out who it was. And I said, I'm in a phone booth. And, you know, like he's supposed to know which one. Sponsors carry this little list around. And he said, what's the matter? I says, tell me what's wrong with me. I'm really screwed up. He said, I'll tell you what's wrong with you. Come on down to the house tonight. Now, a little bit of background that gives the story more power. Part of my... two things from my drinking past will help you understand where I was and how I got to be where I am today. One had to do with the fact that I like these pop psychology books, and I liked them so much I chased down 5 or 6 of the authors and just made a pest out of me. When I had a couple of drinks, I'd talk my way into anything or anywhere. And all the guys disappointed me. I mean, there are a couple of them that are so screwed up that I won't even tell you who they are because their books have helped a lot of people. But I was devastated. I was disillusioned because of this going on. And as a result of that, one day when I was in the disillusionment, I was reading the morning paper, and I realized that Ringling Brothers was coming to town. I thought, hey, that's it. To heck with these pop psychology books. To heck with the people that wrote them. To heck with education that I'd had a lot of. I bet the people with the circus got common sense. That's what I need. I'll go talk to them. I bet they've traveled around the world. I know they have rough lives. I bet they have a lot of wisdom. So I got a press pass. I borrowed a recorder from one of the stations in town. And I got in the circus for nothing twice a day for about a week. It was wonderful. Can you imagine a drunk with a press pass at a circus? and someone on the inside, because that's a little bit of a closed society, was a beautiful entree for me. They introduced me to people and said it was okay for me to be there. And so the circus people kind of opened up. And I was involved with a youth group at that time, and I only have one of the tapes left, but I start out the same way with everybody. I said, I work with a lot of teenagers, and you know how screwed up kids are today. And everybody says, yeah, they always agreed to that. And I said, if you learn something in your life you'd like to pass on to these kids, what would it be? And then everybody slows up, but everybody comes up with something. And you can too. That might not be a bad thing for you to think about tonight. If you've learned something in your life that you'd like to share with other people, that you think's really valuable, what would it be? Well, I got some great answers. But the last night the circus was in town, a couple of the people had promised to talk to me, and I hadn't got around to them. So I went down the railroad track where they were packing up to go to L.A., and I parked my car in a field with some weeds growing up in it, and I didn't realize the weeds were growing out of an irrigation ditch. So the front end of the car is down in this hole, the back wheels are up in the air, spinning around, no traction, I can't get out of there. But I'd seen all kinds of tractors and forklifts and things like that, and I knew I'd get them to pull me out with one of those. So I went running up as best I could to one of the circus people, and I said, my car is in a ditch. Now that's a clue right there. I created the impression I had nothing to do with it. Here's $10 if you get me out. He says, nothing to it. Well, he didn't get a tractor, he got an elephant. Her name was Targa, and they put a work harness on Targa, and she pulled my car out of the ditch. Totally embarrassed. And if you wonder if this really happened, I did too for a while, till I ran across witnesses that remembered it the way I did. But I remember one of them that was embarrassing, because it was a little kid yanking on its parents' clothing, say, look at the elephant pull the drunk's car out of the ditch. Now at that time I didn't know I had a drinking problem. Kid had it figured out, but I didn't know. You know what I was thinking? How dare parents have a young child like this out at this time of night? Which tells you a lot about alcoholism. There's this tragedy going on, and you're in the middle of it, and you've got the focus way off here. The guy pulled me out of the ditch. He wouldn't take the money. He said, you just go home, take care of yourself. He had it figured out, too. And I went home that night, and I sat at the kitchen table doing what alcoholics under stress do. I was drinking. And I don't know what happened that night, but I know how I remember it. It was different. I was drinking for oblivion, for escape, because of the embarrassment. And what happened, instead of relief in that sense, I got clarity. And it was as if the more I drank, the clearer things got. And it was like a horror story. Because there was my life flashing in front of me, and I didn't like anything I saw. I'd trade places with a bug. And I thought, maybe I even said it out loud, I don't know. This is an impossible evening. How could I park in a ditch? I know an elephant didn't pull me out, that's impossible. And I know someone with the circus didn't turn down money. And the next thought I had was this: if these impossible things could happen, then I could be an alcoholic. And I bought it. Nobody called me that. I'd never thought of it. applying it to myself. I knew I drank too much. I was trying to cut down, but I didn't think I was an alcoholic. But when that thought came in my head that night, I knew that that's what I was. I had a bizarre idea what alcoholics were, but it was the first time I saw alcohol as the central problem in my life and not just a solution to the other ones. And I got on the phone and I called somebody, and that's how I got started, and that's why I'm here tonight, among other reasons. So that's a little bit of the background. Another part of the background that's embarrassing that relates to this favorite story of mine that I want to share with you is this. I was working for the Air Force at Travis, hearing confessions on Saturday afternoon, saying Mass Sundays. This is 1965. Vietnam really gets cooking, and they're flying all the wounded into Travis. And they needed a chaplain to work full-time greeting the wounded. And they should have never hired me, but they did, because I was just ordained. So all of a sudden I'm the official greeter, and that's what educators would call one of those teachable moments. You just got shot at and you're home safe. And all you have to do is get shot at, and your priorities do an automatic sort. You know? I was dealing with a lot of kids who knew what was important and what wasn't. And I can tell you a lot of stories about that that are really interesting. But let me get to the point tonight. During the middle of that year, I was really into alcoholism and didn't know it. And the Air Force keeps telling me what a great job I'm doing, but I know that I'm crazy and something's really wrong with me. And at that time, I didn't know I was an alcoholic. I just thought I was crazy. And the reason I thought I was crazy was because I kept doing things I didn't want to do. And I figure if you keep doing things you don't want to do, you're crazy. That's a pretty good working definition for being nuts. And I didn't want anybody to find out I was nuts. And I didn't want to think about it very long either. That's a good reason to drink. So I drank some more. Because I was a chaplain and greeting these guys coming back, a lot of people that year asked me the question, do you really think there are atheists in foxholes? And I gave different answers at different times depending on what I thought about that or how much I had been drinking that day, I guess. Anyway, one day somebody asked me that question, and I said, that's it. Previous to that, let me just fill that in, what I realized I needed was a different understanding of God. And I didn't have that language, but that's what I was looking for. So I would argue for the early masses on Sunday, get dressed in civilian kinds of clothes, and get off base and shop around in Protestant churches. Because I'm looking for a different God, huh? And at that time, I didn't know I was an alcoholic. I thought I suffered from excessive guilt. Well, so does every other alcoholic, but I didn't know that. And I was trying to get rid of the guilt by getting a different understanding of God. Now, if you're getting paid by the Air Force to be a Catholic chaplain and you're shopping around in Protestant churches on company time, it doesn't help the guilt much. And that's part of what was going on. And I never felt comfortable anywhere else because I took my alcoholism with me. Huh? You know that today. You know that's what was going on. But somebody said, do you think there are atheists in foxholes? I don't know what I said that day, but I was fascinated with the question. I said, that's it. The heck with this God stuff. I'll just be an atheist. Because if I'm an atheist, I can do what I want to do, and I won't feel guilty, and that had great appeal at that time. So I dedicated myself to being an atheist. And I didn't do well with that. I prayed that I would be a good atheist. If that sounds crazy, it's because that's crazy, but that's what I did. And I was going to use any resource I could. And that's a good illustration of what happens to alcoholics or other people too, any of us, in a lot of pain. I prayed to be an atheist. Why? So I could get rid of the guilt. Why? So I could be a better chaplain. It does not compute. But when you're in the middle of a lot of pain, you don't hook things up very well. Even today, even sober, even with a lot of program, if you're in a lot of pain, you don't hook things up. That's why we have friends. They can do the hooking up for us. Friends are great at transitions. I'm wonderful at profound statements that are disconnected and kind of floating in the air. They're true unless you compare them with reality. So I screwed up being an atheist. That's really humbling. Anyway, when I asked my sponsor to help me understand what was wrong with me, he said, yes, I'll help you. The problem with you, Gavin, is you believe too much. Well, he hurt me about as badly as you could hurt anybody. I can't think of anything that would be more painful against that background than someone telling me that my mistake in life was believing too much. That didn't make, I mean, this guy had always made sense. He said, I know you don't understand, let me tell you a story. And this is the story he told me. It's my favorite story. If I don't do anything else in my life but spread this story around, I'm going to have a successful life. Some of you have heard it now, but I'd never heard it. He said, suppose you go to a circus. Ha ha. Is my undivided attention at this point. Because he knew what I think of circuses. He knew the elephant's name and all that stuff. Suppose you go to a circus and you see a performer start to climb up a ladder and get higher and higher in the air, and he gets 50 feet up in the air. And as part of his act, he's going to go across this thin steel wire from one side of that arena to the other. And part of what he does is push a little wheelbarrow from that side of the arena to this side. He said, you can believe as much as any human being could possibly believe that he isn't going to fall. He's done that 2-3 times a day for 30 years. So that's belief. But don't tell me you have any faith in his ability or that you trust him until you're willing to get up there with him, 50 feet in the air, and sit quietly in the wheelbarrow while he pushes you across. And now you know the difference between belief and faith. You got a lot of belief. You believe in God, you believe in AA, that's all you talk about. We wish you'd shut up. But you don't have any faith. You don't trust God, you don't trust AA. You're going to do it all by yourself. That was my problem that night. That's been my problem many times since then. If you're new or if you're having belief problems, whatever you believe in, trust it. You know, we practice this program. That means that we do it a little bit at a time, like you practice the piano. And when you first practice the piano, you don't do it really very well. You can carry that to a painful conclusion and think about physicians practicing medicine on us. You know, but anyway, the punchline to that whole story is get back in the wheelbarrow. Whatever it is you believe in, trust it. And don't believe me, just do it, and then you'll know the truth in it. Because the feedback is almost always immediate. If you're willing to trust God. See, I don't trust God. I want to figure him out. I want to talk to him, pray to him, tell him off, tell someone else about him. But rarely do I trust him. And it's so simple. That's where you start. And that brings us to God. Either God exists or he doesn't. And if he does, it'd make a lot of sense to have a pretty good relationship with him. And that's where we'll pick up the next time. Thank you for your attention. Retreats can be wonderful things. They can also be very tiring. So if you need a good rest, get one tonight. If you're compulsive, sleep fast. But we'll have breakfast at 8 o'clock in the morning and help each other to be awake and to be present to whatever it is that God wants to do with us tomorrow. I'd like to end these sessions with the Lord's Prayer. Ken, you want to lead us?
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever. Amen. Keep coming back, it works.